Hey guys, I recently made a video where I talked about the fiction books I want to read in 2025, and I stuck to fiction on purpose because I wanted to make this video. I wanted to talk about some of the nonfiction books I want to read this year. I'm not making a list of 25. I don't even know how many is in the pile in front of me, but it is a lot. I have recently started tandem reading, so I'll read a nonfiction book as I'm reading a fiction book, because I love nonfiction, but I just tend to not pick them up as often as I pick up a fiction book. So I thought that this would be like the best way to ensure that I'm reading some, because it is a goal of mine this year to read more nonfiction, because I love nonfiction so much. I just don't get to it as often as I should. I think it's also because law school killed a part of me, and I wasn't really able to do many intellectual things while in law school because my brain was just so fried all the time and I was so sad. So I'm trying to get back into that. I'm trying to feel more like myself and read more nonfiction this year. And that is my long tangent intro. Now we're going to talk about the books, which is what you're really here for. First book on the list is Pharma, Greed, Lies, and the Poisonings of America by Gerald Posner. This is a journalistic inquiry into the pharmaceutical industry, and specifically talks about one family, the Sacklers, the family that became one of America's wealthiest from the success of OxyContin, an opioid, which obviously we know is not a good thing, and they aren't good people. But I'd love to read more about this. I've heard that this is supposed to be very easy to read, very accessible language. I just think this is a really important issue right now, and it's one that isn't really talked about or understood very much, but it's directly connected to capitalism and the oligarchy that we live in. So I think it's a really important book to pick up, and it just sounds interesting to me. Next, we have Digging Our Own Graves, Coal Miners and the Struggle Over Black Lung Disease by Barbara Ellen Smith. I don't know what it is about this book, but as soon as I got it, I had a Haymarket subscription, which is where I'm pretty sure this one came from. If you don't know, Haymarket is a really great radical publisher based in the United States. I love their books. I buy from them and Verso books all the time. And I once had the Haymarket subscription, which as soon as I have an income again, I'm also going to get once again. But it's $30, and for that they send you every single book that they publish every month. And you can say that you don't want some of them and they won't send them to you, but why wouldn't you want more books? Because I have an issue, I have a consumerism issue, so that's how I think. Anyway, I had this subscription and they gave me this book when I had that subscription. And ever since I've gotten it, I think that was 2020 too. It was 5 years ago. Oh my god. Ever since I got this book, I've been so deeply interested in it. I don't know what it is. I think it's maybe just the fact that it's a labor issue and I am interested in labor. But I'm just so interested. I'd love to learn more about Appalachia, and I know this takes place in Appalachia and talks about coal miners in that region specifically. Something about this book just really piqued my interest, and I have to pick it up ASAP. Then we have The Stranger in the Woods, The Extraordinary Story of the Last True Hermit by Michael Finkel. This book just sounds so interesting to me. It follows, I'm going to say that all the time in this video, probably just over and over again, that's the one thing I'm going to say. It follows the last true hermit, a man who was just fuck it, and went and lived in nature and didn't talk to anyone. And this journalist or author, I don't know what his title is, this author I guess, interviewed him and learned about his life. And as someone who frequently thinks about just saying fuck it to everything and going and living in the woods, but who has no survival skills and would definitely not be able to live without modern conveniences, it sounds so interesting to me. I would love to know how this man lived, and I also read The Art Thief by this author. I've heard some critiques of it, and I need to look into that further based off of how he researched it and his connection with the guy that he was writing about. But I think it's good going into this one knowing that he had a personal relationship with this man so that I'm reading it more objectively. And again, just really interesting subject matter. Next is a beefy one, and that is Hamas by Paola Caridi, From Resistance to Regime, it says, is a little tagline. This talks about Hamas, which is a radical Islamist group that was elected to lead Gaza, I believe, Palestine, in 2006. I got this from a radical bookstore. And I'm saying that on purpose because I want a radical left-leaning take on Hamas. I don't want to read some random Israel-loving Republicans' take on Hamas. So I'm hoping that this is a leftist take on them. I really want to learn more about them because there's just so much misinformation out there and so much fear-mongering from what I understand. And I think this will be like a really good way to inform myself more about them as an organization. It says, it looks into the conditions of this war-torn region that led to the rise of Hamas and provides an unbiased look at the complex allegiances that Palestinians have towards their governing bodies and institutions amidst a state of siege and near constant war with Israel. That sounds interesting. I want to learn why the Palestinians voted Hamas in. I want to learn why they have chosen Hamas. It's hard, right? Because now I'm getting into it. Because it's also like Hamas was chosen to lead in 2006, and a huge proportion of Palestinians, even before the fucking genocide. I can't even say that because the genocide has been happening since the Nakba. But since the more recent assault on Gaza that we've seen, which hopefully they're stopping soon with the ceasefire, but who knows, because Israel, like, does not respect ceasefires. But my point is that even before the more recent assault, a large portion of people living in Palestine were children because of how many of them get killed by Israel on a regular basis. So it's like, can you even say that they represent the interests when, like, so many Palestinians are under the age of 18 and weren't able to vote in 2006? I don't know. I have complicated thoughts on this issue that I'm not summarizing well right now, and I'm probably going to get yelled at online for. So, anyway, I want to read this one, and I will let you know my thoughts. I will review it when I read it, because I don't really care if people yell at me online. I probably should care. Anyway, next book. The Shape of Sex, Non-Binary Gender from Genesis to the Renaissance by Leah Devon. This book talks about how the idea that there are only two opposite sexes became, like, constructed throughout time. And it talks about, like, how non-binary gender has always existed. I think this book is really important. I'm filming this in January. Trump just took office recently, and he just signed the executive order saying that there are only two genders in the United States, which, like, don't get me started on. If you think transgender people don't exist or shouldn't exist, then you should. But I'm saying a lot of things today. I'm getting more political than I normally do, but I am a very political person. I just don't talk about it all the time in connection with books. So if you don't like my take, then I'm sorry, but maybe just leave. This sounds like a really interesting book. I haven't read many stuff on, like, gender studies. It's like an area of my reading that I'm definitely not proficient in, and I really need to work more at. Like, I need to buy more books that talk about gender and read more about gender. Is like a gap in my reading history. So I really want to pick this one up. It just sounds so interesting, and it has a really great cover too. This is a book that I stole from my ex-boyfriend. If you want to yell at me about anything, yell at me about that. Next is a book that I started and never finished, which is, like, to my eternal shame. And that is Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants by Robin Wall Kimmerer. This book is just what it sounds like it is. It's about Indigenous wisdom and the teaching of plants. I started this book and I loved it. I loved it so much. I was so into it. I actually found out about this book because, like, years and years ago, I listened to a podcast to talk to Robin Kimmerer, and she is the most comforting, like, maternal voice I've ever heard. And she was just such, like, a beautiful lady. I'm not talking, like, face-wise. I'm just talking, like, personality-wise. I loved her. I've always wanted to read her work ever since, and so I'm so excited. This is going to be the year that I reread this book. I think I've talked about this before. The reason I put this book down when I was reading it and enjoying it so much is because I got dumped in the middle of this book, and I didn't feel like reading, and then ever since I've felt like this book is, like, cursed or something, which is a crazy thing to say, but it's how I felt, and it's why I haven't picked it up, and I'm going to pick it back up this year because I was loving it, and I'm not going to let a stupid boy let me not read a book. Enough about my love life. The next book I want to read is The Radium Girls, The Dark Story of America's Shining Woman by Kate Moore. This is a book I've heard so much about. It talks, the thing about nonfiction books is that you read the little tagline and then, like, you don't even have to summarize it because the little tagline tells you everything you need to know. This is about, like, the girls who worked with radium during the First World War, who were working with it, and then they began to mysteriously fall ill. Why? No one knows. I've just heard a lot of people talk highly about this book. I don't know, the subject matter is, like, crazy interesting to me, but I think, like, the portrayal of it in this book is going to be really interesting. I don't know. Am I making sense? I don't know. Then we have Black Power Afterlives, The Enduring Significance of the Black Power... Can't speak. The Enduring Significance of the Black Panther Party, which was edited by Diane Fugino and Matif Marcus. I recently read Asada, an autobiography, and I'm obsessed with it. Like, it was so fucking good. It's actually the first, like, autobiography of a Black Panther that I've ever read. I would love to read more from the perspective of Black Panthers and more of their writings. It's something that's, like, definitely on my to-do list. But I thought this would be, like, a really interesting book to read. It talks about how the Black Panther Party has shaped the practices and ideas that have animated grassroots activism in the decades since it's declined. And it just talks about, like, the long-lasting impact of the Black Panther party. I want to learn more about Black radical history and just radical history and radical thought in general. So I thought this would be a really good book to pick up this year. Next, we have Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America by Ibram X. Kendi. Did I say Kennedy? I didn't mean to say Kennedy. He's not Kennedy. Kendi. I'm so sorry. I can't speak. I shouldn't have a YouTube channel. This talks about how, like, anti-Black thinking isn't just about, like, personal bias, but also how it's been embedded in America's institutions. I'm pretty sure it just talks about America. Yeah, it just says of racist ideas in America. So although I'm sure this applies to many other countries, it's just micro-focused on America. This is an author and a book I've heard a lot about. I actually read some segments of this for a course I took in undergrad, but I never read the whole thing. It's been on my shelf ever since, and I want to pick it up. And it's a National Book Award winner as well, so gotta pick that up. Then we have After Black Lives Matter by Cedric G. Johnson. This book talks about the Black Lives Matter movement and the uprising in 2020 and why it wasn't effective and what we could have done better and what lessons we can learn from it. And I think that's, like, a really interesting perspective. Like, the uprising after George Floyd was so massive and it feels like it should have been influential, but it doesn't seem like any of the demands were actually met when you look at it. And I really wonder, like, comparing that to the uprisings in the 60s around, like, racial tensions in America and racism in America, like, that had some long-lasting effects with some actual legislation being written, like the Civil Rights Act and the Fair Housing Act. Like, those were all in the 60s. And meanwhile, we had this huge movement and nothing happened. No policy was, like, generated out of that. And I don't know if, like, it's just impossible to have any good social policy now because of the way that the United States is, or if it was, like, something about the movement. I don't know. I have no idea. I would love to learn, though, and that's why I bought this book and why I want to read it this year. After that, I have Ghostland, An American History in Haunted Places by Colin Dickey. This is another book that I actually had started to read, and I was really enjoying it, but then I put it down. I was actually reading it for a video. I was going to do a video about reading, like, the spookiest book on my TBR for October, and I just didn't end up doing the video. So that's the only reason I put it down. I was really enjoying this. It really talks about, like, the historical context behind American ghost stories. It is so fucking interesting. It talks about, like, ghosts as a sociological concept almost, and I was really enjoying it and I really want to read more about it, so I definitely want to finish this one this year. The next book I want to read is Disability Visibility, First-Person Stories from the 21st Century edited by Alice Wong. It's, like, written by a bunch of different people who have disabilities. I want to pick this one up because disability is another thing that I haven't read much about. I feel like I tend to gravitate towards, like, stuff about racism and communism and capitalism, and I feel like I have these, like, blanks in my knowledge. That was a very inelegant way of saying that, but I think you get what I mean. I haven't read much about disability. I haven't read much about, like, gender studies. Like, I've read about, like, feminism, but not, like, transgenderism and non-binary people. So I have these, like, gaps in my knowledge that I really want to read more about so I can learn more about. Disability is one of them, and this is, like, all first-person narratives, which makes it, I think, even more important. And I've heard really good things about this, so I'm excited to read it. And the last two books are not as political as the other ones. I'm sure politics gets into them somehow, because politics invades every aspect of everything ever. But they're not as explicitly political as the rest of these books have been. So maybe I should have started off the video with these, because these are, like, the tamer nonfiction books on my TBR. I definitely shouldn't have started off with the Hamas book. Maybe I should have saved that to the end for people who, like, actually watch the videos. Anyway, the next book I want to talk about is Worn, A People's History of Clothing by Sophia Thanhauser. This is a book that's been on so many TBRs of mine. I'm always talking about how much I want to read this book. It's essentially a social history of 5 stories: linen, cotton, silk, synthetics, and wool. It's about the clothes you wear and where they come from. It talks about like clothes throughout history, as well as like how these things are produced and like how our relationships to them have changed. I can't even begin to describe how interested in this I am. Like, I'm the type of person who will watch videos about fashion history on YouTube for hours. Like, I'm obsessed with people who will watch like Little Women and then write like an entire critique about how it wasn't accurate to the time period. or write like a glowing review about how they changed the clothing to like more accurately tell the story. I'm just so interested in fashion. And so I think this is going to be the perfect book for me. I just can't describe how excited I am to pick this up. And this is finally, I bought this book last year, kept wanting to pick it up, but kept not picking it up. And now that I'm like dedicating myself to reading nonfiction, I'm definitely going to pick it up. And in a similar theme, the last book on this little TBR is Eyeliner, A Cultural History by Zara Hankier. I mean, the title says it all. It's Cultural History of Eyeliner. I love makeup. I love like girly shit look fashion and makeup, and I would love to read more about like the histories of these things. And this one in particular, it talks about the stunning variety among cultures across time and space. It has intimate conversations with Chadian nomads, Japanese geisha, Indian dancers, New York's drag queens, and more. It embraces the profound significance of its namesake, especially among communities of color. It sounds so good. It sounds so interesting. I need to pick this up. I need to read it. So there you go. I'm feeling a little bit embarrassed because I feel like I went on a lot of like political tangents in this video. I'm always embarrassed when I do that because I feel like there's just so much more I need to learn before I can talk about things, which is probably something I need to work on. It's probably just like a self-confidence issue. But it's good to be informed. It's good to know the shit you're talking about. So I hope that you're not reporting me to the FBI for my comments on Hamas. And I will just gonna end this video. Let me know if any of these books sound interesting to you. Give me nonfiction book recommendations. I need to read more nonfiction. I'm so excited about doing that this year. I would love to hear your recommendations. And that's all. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon with another video. Goodbye.